Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen. On this episode, we're back with my friend and repeat podcast guest, Diego Ugalde, former Navy SEAL, owner of the Trident Approach. Diego, thanks for doing this again.
I'm the one who asked you, bro. I'm happy to be here.
So let's do this. For starters, tell us about the new book, and then I want to go a little bit into some of the history and some of the SEAL days and some of the stuff, and then let's spend time on the book this time. So tell us the name, the release date, and the premise.
So the name is Leading from the Deep, a Navy SEAL Psychedelic Approach to Conscious Leadership. It was finally released December 13th, and we seem to be getting a lot of really good feedback, which is a good thing. And it was it was like a 4-year long process, because I don't know if you remember, I think we talked the last time I was on the show. It was like this whole idea of, after I retired out of the SEAL teams, my life became, deeply immersed in leadership and teams and we were happy sharing the best of what we learned in the SEAL teams. But in 2019, I found psychedelics, and we started branching off into treating veterans with post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, addiction, and all that stuff through psychedelics. But as much time as I was spending down there, I started to just see all this connective tissue that psychedelics had with leadership. And so eventually over time, that's what we metamorphosized into, is sharing the best of what we learned in the SEAL teams combined with our deepest insights of psychedelic medicine use and how we can approach leadership from a consciousness standpoint. So it took about 4 years or whatever to write the book, but I'll say for 3.5 years, I didn't know what book I was writing, because I have like a super cool life that would be worth writing a memoir about. I have, perspective on SEAL leadership that could be worth writing about, this perspective on psychedelics that could be worth writing about. I didn't know. So I just started writing. And then after that 3.5 years, I had 200,000 words of just stuff all over the place. I didn't file any of it. It wasn't efficiently put anywhere. It was just bar napkins and all that stuff. And I didn't necessarily know what to do, where the direction was going. And then I went in September of 2022. I went to Peru to do ayahuasca for the first time. And then there's this location, it's called La Medicina in Tarapoto, Peru. And just an incredible place for people to go do healing and all of that there, where they have a small library that's got maybe 100 or 200 books. And there's amazing books on psychedelics, like tribal healing and consciousness and that kind of thing. And then I did my first medicine journey, and the book was weighing heavily on my mind at the time, because I was just kind of stuck, to be honest, and lost in that just millions of words everywhere. And it said, hey, your book can belong in that library down there. And then immediately after that, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I got home from the retreat. I put all those 200,000 words aside, and I started writing from scratch, page one, all the way to the end. It took me 5 months to write the whole thing. And because I'm not a professionally educated person by any means, it took from February to December to edit the thing. And we finally got it to where we wanted it to be. And super, super happy about how it all turned out.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. This is going to, the second part of the interview today is going to be interesting, because I'm not like a psychedelics guy. So, we're going to have you help me with my skepticism and teach me stuff that I don't know. And I got lots of questions. So before we get into that though, let's go back to kind of your life before that. So, you end up in the tell me the division in the Marines with the medical, where you were before you got out and then got back in as a SEAL.
Yeah, so I tried SEAL training the first time. Wasn't fast enough or strong enough or mature enough to make it through training, so they kicked me out. And then just being in the military, it's like, you're not going home. Where are you going? And because I was already a medic, I chose to go be a medic with the Marines. Now, since the Marines have started, they have always gotten their medics from the Navy. It's a very time-honored tradition. I was very, very lucky to be part of that. So I went through kind of like the Marine transformational school, it's not Marine Corps boot camp. I was not a Marine, but it kind of integrated us or taught us the beginnings of how to integrate into a Marine Corps unit. And so, yeah, I went to that school, and then from there I went to 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, stationed in Camp Pendleton. And then I went on what they call a Westpac or a Western Pacific ship deployment. So I was on a ship that was, of all the time I've been in the Navy, that was the only time I've actually ever been on a ship, and that was amazing. I thought it was so great. My primary role and responsibility was just running sick call, and all the rest of the time I was just watching the ocean go by. I mean, it was just transformational. I mean, just being there. But ultimately, my contract ended up coming up, and I had the choice to either stay in the military or leave. And I joined the military to be a SEAL. I wasn't a SEAL, so I decided at that point it was time for myself to go figure something else out. And I love medicine, so I ended up becoming a paramedic and kind of moved all over the place in Massachusetts, Florida, and Hawaii. But it was like during that was like an 8-year span, and during that whole 8 years it was just like this Chinese water torture of never making it through BUD. So I decided to ultimately re-enter the Navy entirely and then go back in. So yeah.
So what do you feel like were some of the advantages and disadvantages of going through BUDS and then SQT as a 29-year-old?
We'll start with the disadvantages. It was, it just took its toll on my body, I think, as far as I could tell, more so than it did like the 19 and 28-year-olds. In fact, I think we had a 17-year-old in our class, almost certainly did. And, even after Hell Week, some of those guys were pretty spry, and, moving around like a cat still. And I was just, not everybody, but a lot of people were, and I was pretty swollen, and things just took longer to heal from. And, that was a clear disadvantage. I was an old man going through at 29, comparatively speaking. The other disadvantage was I felt a disconnect between the mentality of, these kids. They were exactly how I was. They weren't doing anything wrong, but they just had it in their mind, whatever it was, wherever they were as humans in their developmental process in terms of maturity and all that. And I had it in my 9-year-old mind as though I knew, which I didn't, maybe where they should be, all of those things. So that was also a disadvantage. My age gave me some false illusion as though I knew better somehow. But it was also a disconnect. I had moved past all that stuff years before, so I had lost connection to what it meant to just be, with that mindset of, unstoppable. You can't tell me anything. I don't know, that kind of thing. So, but the advantages, it's hard. Yeah, I don't know so much about the age, but I can tell you that I had a huge advantage having spent 4 months in SEAL training years before that. So I knew so much of what was going, not only what I was kind of in for, what it was going to take up to the point that I'd made it, which I made it Friday before Hell Week the first time. So I knew what it was going to take to get up to that point. Another super cool, sneaky advantage that came up was when I came back, some of the guys that were in my first BUDS class were instructors in this class. And I had been through so much in my first class. It was like this huge dramatic saga that I had like a huge amount of respect from these instructors, which doesn't happen. You show up, instructors hate you because whatever, you're a BUD student. But for these guys, they were like, oh my God, I can't believe you came back after everything I had been through. So, that made things a little easier in some ways. Like, for example, I got in trouble and I had to do something like 1,000 8-count bodybuilders to pay for some silly mistake I made or something. But we didn't have time at the moment for me to do it. And then we did a bunch of evolutions throughout the day. And then at the end, I ran back up to the instructor. I'm like, hey, I owe you 1,008 count bodybuilders. Like, I'm ready to go now. And he's like, you already did them. And then he walked away. Like, that doesn't happen. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen in buds. It's just like anybody else, it would have been like, all right, ready, begin, you know, kind of thing. So there were some advantages in that way. The other advantage was, you know, when I showed up to buds the first time, I think I was 20, but really, like, maturity speaking, I was probably 9 or 10 years old. When I showed up the second time at 29, I was probably more along the lines of maybe 19 or 20 years maturity. So I was still way below, but mature enough to be like, hey, wait, this is a thing, and you got to get your head on right, that kind of thing. It took me a while. Still, I look at myself now, I'm 49 now. I'm not 49 years old, dude. but it's okay, but either way, that showing back up just with the life experience and the development was really helpful, that I didn't have that the first time. First time I went in fact, one of my friends was like, hey man, you don't look like you're in that good of a shape to go to SEAL training. I'm like, it's okay, they're not gonna make me quit, I'm good. That's the mentality that I showed up with the first time. And just there's no replacement for humbleness, and not choosing or believing you're humble, but being humble. Like, just I was humbled by the process. That's something that I can't replace, and was really, really valuable for me going the second time.
Yeah. When you think about, and for people not as familiar, can you talk a little bit about the difference of buds and maybe more of the screening versus SQT, SEAL qualification training and learning to become a SEAL?
Yeah. So buds is basically like boot camp for SEALs. You go to the normal boot camp for the Navy just to get into the Navy. And then after that, especially these days, you go to buds, and then you kind of start from the basics of, like, this is what the culture is. This is how we go about doing things. Here's how you swim. Here's how you get comfortable in the water. Here's how you dive. Small unit tactics, like learning about weapons and cleaning them and that kind of thing. And during that process, they come to a level of understanding of if they can trust you under stress or not. And if you really, really want to be there, that's really what the first part about buds is. I mean, it is, first phase is just want to find out whether or not you genuinely want to be, or you're willing to put in the work to be there or not. And that's in the form of freezing you or beating you down and all that. Well, once you're done with buds, then it's like, okay, now we can train. Now we can actually start to really learn, start to really train. And so SQT is like a microcosm of what the teams are like in the teams. So some people find it interesting to know that like a SEAL team has to qualify in order to deploy every cycle. So our cycles are 2 years long, and it's broken up into 6-month parts. First 6 months is individual schools, where you go to all these schools like medic or sniper or whatever it is, these different qualifications that a team actually needs in order to be deployable. And then the second 6 months is where the team gets together and they do diving, driving, jumping out of airplanes, all the maritime stuff, all of that. That's called ULT, unit level training. That's what SQT is. So what you do is you go through, for the very first time, here's how SEALs drive Humvees, here's how we drive cars, here's how we dive, here's how we jump out of planes, here's how we shoot, here's how we work together in small units and that kind of thing. So that when you show up to a SEAL team, there's at least some level of confidence. And that's, in SQT is actually where we earn what people know as our trident, which is like the golden eagle that we kind of wear on our uniform on our chest, that signifies to the military, even from space, it's so big that we're SEALs. So when we show up, they're like, okay, we know you know how to tactically dive, we know you know how to tactically jump out of planes and that kind of thing. And then for sure, I mean, the learning curve is still incredibly steep, but it's better than, you would be non-functional showing up to a SEAL team straight out of BUD/S. You wouldn't know what to do. So, and so SQT is 6 months long as well. And yeah, so from there, people just kind of spread. After graduation, after getting their training, they kind of spread out to one of the two coasts, East Coast or West Coast, and jump in with their first team. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we have a lot of like CEOs and investment fund managers listen to the show, or people who want to become those things. And when you think about mental toughness, whether it's in sports, in business, in special operations, they're all different, but they've got some similarities, And so my question is, let's start with like, what was one of the hardest things when you went through BUD/S the second time, and what did you tell yourself to get through it?
So there was a difficult time in BUD/S for me. It was like through this particular type of evolution that they don't do anymore. It just sucked. It was called Hydro Hell Week. It happened after Hell Week. After Hell Week, your body is so busted and swollen and all this kind of stuff. They can't like get you back into logs and boats and all that kind of stuff. They can just break you in half. So instead, they do this very simple thing on paper, which is where you go out into the water and you do what the old underwater demolition team guys used to do. The guys who were SEALs before there were SEALs, and we would measure the depth of the ocean floor, and we go out there with like these weighted lines that were measured, and we would just drop the weight until it hit the floor, and then we would see where the line was, and we would know how deep it was, and we would mark it on this grease pencil or whatever. We would do that during the day. It's this very slow and arduous process. It's cold, the waves are throwing you around kind of thing. It's all got to be coordinated. You got to be online, even though there's currents and all this stuff. It's kind of hairy, not hairy, but just it's kind of a mess. And then we would do it at night. And because it's BUD/S, we would put like camouflage face paint on and all this, which that sounds kind of fun, right? It sounds cool, like you're doing like your first Navy SEAL stuff. But in actuality, it was totally miserable because there's this thing, it's called like a Hell Week blues, where you put all of your energy, all of this stuff, all this motivation and adrenaline and all this stuff goes into you to complete the 5.5 days of training. And then when you're done training, you're just gone. So all that motivation for most people is gone. And then, so these are very long days. And once we're done with this whole huge, long, drawn out process of not only during the day, but in the night, then here comes the really crappy part. We got to go back to the training compound and then actually draw out these charts of what the actual ocean floor looks like. That doesn't sound like that's that big of a deal, but it's SEAL training. So I was telling you before, we put camouflage paint on our face. Like if you got any smudges of any camel paint or anything like that on the map, on the chart, it was trash. And each one of these charts takes 5 hours to create, to do it properly. So we would get, back to the training command like at 11 o'clock at night. We had 5 hours of charts to draw, and then we had to wake up and do it all over again. Nobody graduated anything. We made it through Hell Week, but so what? We have all these months of training left to do. So what ends up happening is we had to submit these charts into the instructor staff, and if there's too many erase marks, any camouflage paint or sand or anything like that on these charts, which we just came in sopping wet and all that, we'd have to redo them, and each one of these things takes 5 hours to do. So there were people who had 50 hours of charts to redo over the, it was just maddening. There was a sense of madness that came into like every single thing that you did, any line that you made, anything. And that in and of itself, but by far, in my opinion, by far was the worst and hardest thing to do in BUD/S. It wasn't the boats, it wasn't the logs, it was anything. It was just the mind twist of, if this goes wrong, I'm going to have to start all over again. And there's nothing worse than not being efficient with your time, or more importantly, your sleep in SEAL training. And so, coupled on top of that, just this whole idea of being in the Hell Week blues of like questioning, just all your motivation has been kind of drained. So really what it ends up doing, what the whole reason for this whole explanation is just understanding whether or not you're actually committed to doing what you're trying to do, what you want to do. There are leaders who want to change, who want to perform and all this stuff when everything is good. But then when everything is bad, where are you? And it doesn't mean you suck, doesn't mean, all of these things that I hear all the time. It's just, where are you when everything goes bad? In the SEAL teams, we have a saying that says everybody wants to be a team guy when the sun's out. So, for example, we would have like these training evolutions where we would be like in the South Pacific somewhere, jumping out of airplanes, and we knew after this jump, a couple hours later, we were going to be sitting in a bar drinking beers and stuff like that. Like, people were like, "Oh my God, I wish I was a Navy SEAL." Like, yeah, all right, cool. Wait till February, and we're doing like shipboarding operations in Chesapeake, Virginia, when the water's 29 degrees, and you got, all day transits, all night transits. You can't feel anything, and there's crystallized water all over your face. Do you really want to be? So as a leader or as an athlete or whatever, of course, it's super cool to look at the whole idea of what success could ultimately look like in the end state and all this stuff. But really what it takes to get to those places where they're actually meaningful, where it's enough to keep you going, jazzed about life, jazzed about what you're doing, is what you're doing when everything sucks. Yeah.
So what did you tell yourself when you're making these maps and you feel like life sucks? What are you telling yourself? How did you get yourself through it when you're like, hold on, I thought I was supposed to be here to like save hostages and kick doors down. What are we doing?
I did the worst possible thing looking back that I could do, which I think is what almost, if not everyone else did, which was completely check out. I just turned the mind off and just did it. Which I think is a really powerful mechanism in order to function. But it's a terrible mechanism in order to reach elite human performance. And I think that's like a critical component that's missing in all training, whether it's sports or special operations or even mental health, is this whole idea that the power that humans have to just check out instead of fully immersing themselves in the experience for powerful transcendence. It's like shutting down. So I shut down. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to, I didn't want to be cold. I didn't want to have to you have to imagine how hard you have to scrub your face in order to get that canvas paint off. It's not like the Halloween paint. It's like just this oil that you cannot get off, and you got to sit there and scrub, all of this. And then plus your skin is already chafed from Hell Week just before and all that. Like, it sucks. I didn't want to be there, but there was also no way that I was going to quit. And at least for my part. So it was just a matter of just going through the motions and the way, and that's what's kind of jacked up about it, is there was so many times when things got hard where I shifted into this mentality of just going through the motions in order to survive kind of thing, which ended up, I think, really shaping a lot of patterns that I had in life, even growing up as a kid, that weren't helpful to me as a growing and developing human, but it just was what it was. It was where I was at the time.
Yeah. Well, let's do a reverse story then. Let's talk about, some hairy combat story where you did turn on your brain the full amount and it made all the difference.
When I was very lucky. In fact, I won't even say that. What I will say is I am the luckiest person I know, and that's followed me throughout my whole life. And part of that luck manifested itself in the SEAL teams. And so I was with SEAL Team 2, and the SEAL teams will rotate. I was telling you before that we have like these 2-year cycles, and they're broken up into 6 months. Well, everybody's got those 2-year cycles. So every 6 months they are doing this particular thing. So every 6-month block, SEAL Team 2 was deploying from October to April of every other year. And so what that meant is, and I was lucky because I got an opportunity to go to Iraq for my deployments with them. So every winter I would go on deployments. Now there's something that's known as the fighting season, and the fighting season, for what I'm sure there are people who understand this on a biological level, but for whatever reason, the insurgents and the fighters and all that stuff, they had all this gumption during the summertime that completely left them in the wintertime. So we would replace like SEAL Team 10, for example, pretty often. And when we went to go like do turnover meetings with them, we would have discussions with them, and every guy in their platoon had like 5 or 6 kills, easy at the lowest. The rest of them had more than that. And so we had it in our heads about how many kills we were going to get. And that was just a mentality that we had. But we never got into the kind of hairy situations that they did, because I just don't understand why. But they, I could break down a door and there could be somebody next to a weapon, and in the wintertime they'd be like, don't shoot me. Where if I did that in the summertime, they would grab their weapon and shoot back. It's just whatever. It is what it is. I say lucky because I didn't know it at the time, but I can tell you that my mind would not have been able to handle well if I'd just taken the life of another human being, like flat out. There's no doubt there. I thought I was ready. I was convincing myself. I was like psyching myself up. All I wanted was to kill somebody, but man, if it would have actually happened, it would wreck me. So anyway, with all of that being said, we still got in firefights from time to time. It wasn't like they never fought. They did fight. And I was very lucky because, after I failed out of BUD/S the first time, I eventually ended up going on to work as a paramedic. And so I had all this experience in treating gunshot wounds and car crashes and burns and all of these things for like 5 years. And so when I showed up to the SEAL teams, as a new guy, you're just like below dirt and that kind of thing. But every once in a while, I would get some sort of comment of like, man, I'm glad you're on the team. Like you already know all this stuff. And I was like, there's one thing I don't know, and I don't know what that is. I don't know how to treat somebody that I love. And so I'm guessing I'm going to find out what that is. And it turns out, we were on this operation, and it was very close to the time we even showed up. We weren't in country for more than a couple of days. And we got ambushed by these by these folks that were like laying outside of the city limits, and they had night vision goggles and they had silencers and stuff like that, just like us. In fact, we thought the first shot was somebody had a negligent discharge, because it sounded exactly like what it sounds like when you shoot with the suppressor on. And then it took some time to find out that, well, wait a minute, the enemy has night vision and suppressors too. This is a whole nother fight. But so that first shot ended up shooting one of our guys in the chest, and all of this was going on. The darkness was going on, the mass confusion and all this, but for me, I was in a place that I was focused in. I was comfortable in. Like I know what blood looks like. I know what holes in the chest look like. And by the way, I've got a bag or a kit full of something that like a mechanic might look at his toolbox. Like I know everything. I don't even have to look. I know where everything is, all of that stuff. And I've been doing this stuff for years. And yeah, it was just interesting. Flow state really is what we're talking about. It wasn't a deliberate decision. It just was part of the momentum of how everything kind of where that was checking in very specifically in some places and checking out entirely for some other places, and in fact, even looking back, my ego can start to throw in parts of shame of like, well, were you fully aware of what was going on? Like, what if you needed to stop and move, all of those second guesses and judgments and things. But the point is, I was absolutely singularly focused on how do I help this guy survive. And I knew how. I knew what to do. I just did it. And
what did you do?
So they have these things are needle decompressions. So what we I'm starting to get ahead of myself here. There's an initial assessment that you go through when somebody gets hit. You know, in the civilian world, they kind of knew, at least at the time, I don't know what they call it anymore, but ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation, that kind of thing. We had a different one in combat medicine. It started with B, like bleeding. Were there any, you know, arterial bleeding that's going on? Because that really, that's what's going to kill. Like if they're not immediately dead, what's going to kill them is bleeding. And then the airway, so it was BATS, bleeding airway, tension pneumothorax, and shock, I think it was. So those were our ABCs. So I just went through the list, and so as I was, he wasn't bleeding really arterially speaking that I could see, at least externally. He had an airway, he was talking, and tension pneumothorax. I saw there was a hole in his chest. And so, okay, so we want to treat that. And so he was developing difficulty in breathing and that kind of thing. So there's something that's called needle thoracentesis, where you put a really long and big gauge needle into the chest to, and get too technical, but essentially what it is just air is compressing air is going outside of the lung, but remaining inside the chest cavity. So then it starts to squeeze the lung, and so they can't breathe. And then that lung so much pressure can build up that it can actually build so much up on the heart that it stops the heart from being able to function properly, and then that's how people die. So what you do is you poke another hole in the chest, and it releases a lot of, and then the lung can re-expand, and the heart can beat normally, and that kind of thing. So we did that, and then we got him back to the hospital in Balad, and then I put a chest tube in him, and that's where. So like a needle, you can imagine sort of like the biggest gauge needle you've seen for like giving somebody a shot. That's the needle that we use for needle thoracentesis. But for when we put in like a chest tube, you know, that's about as big as my middle finger is. And you put a tube that big inside of their chest, and then you can like forcibly extract blood and extra air and that kind of thing. And that's more like first one was immediate life-saving, and the second one was more long-term life-saving. Yeah, so we did that, and all of those things were more like I was just really focused and comfortable. No matter what was going on, I knew what to do. It was good. Yeah.
You know, I know it's just like some cliche, but as you're talking, I kept hearing through my head, when the time for action has come, the time for preparation has ended. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that's such a living thing of, you know, the fact that you knew where everything in your bag was without having to look, and just like internal confidence that you'd put in the meaningful repetitions ahead of time and had the experience to face what you're up against. Would you say it differently?
Yeah, because I see it as like even that was preparation, because I learned from that. You know what I mean? So it was just like it was preparing for the next time it happened. And I learned, well, I want my tweezers to be like 3 centimeters closer to this side, or I want my zippers to close on this edge instead of that edge, or maybe when I put my bag down next to me in a different way than I did. So it's just
you're never done. It's like continuous improvement.
It's all preparation for it never ends. Yeah.
How many people do you think you pitched? How many people do you think you patched up while being an active duty SEAL
in combat? Like 3, maybe. I'm telling you, it was just they would just give up. I was very, very, very. We've been in a bunch of firefights. We were in a firefight. If I remember right, it was something like somewhere around the area, like 300 or 400 people got killed, and none of us got injured. So it was like, you know, it was just, I was very, very lucky. And we even hit an IED, like a huge IED on the way out of the battle, and nobody even got hurt. So my experience is like immeasurably different than a lot of SEALs who are just like, oh man, like I was taking care of dudes like every night. Like, what are you talking about? You know, by the way, while I was bleeding out too, kind of thing. You know, that just wasn't my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So let's switch
Okay.
gears. A lot of dudes handled those hairy situations differently, and some of them didn't process it and have a lot to deal with coming back. I mean, certainly your friends, many of my friends as well from your community. So in the book, tell us when to listen. So somebody like me, no experience with psychedelics, probably pretty uninformed, skeptical in certain ways because I see like the people who truly treat it like medicine, and then there's some other folks that like I get the big long spiel from them, and they're giving me all these rationalizations, and then at the end, it comes out like for them they see this as it's kind of like let's go do drugs, kind of an attitude, and they're like I mean just like medicine from the doctor or the pharmacy abusing it
It's the
kind
same,
of thing, right? So somebody like pretty ignorant about it. Help me understand what a conversation is like for you with a combat veteran who, PTS and things like this, you feel like actually could benefit from that experience.
So the first time I ever heard about psychedelics in this way, it was, we were with the Trident Approach for a year at that point, and one of my pathfinders during our meeting said, "Hey man, I'm not coming into work next week. There's an organization, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, that takes SEALs down to Mexico and treats them with psychedelics for post-traumatic stress, addiction, and that kind of thing." And I was blown, like I'd never heard of psychedelics being used in the context of mental health at all before that point. To me, they were all like music festivals or going to Disneyland or whatever. But I knew that it was struggling, and so I didn't care. So I was just like, cool, man. Hey, go do your thing. Can't wait to see you when you get back. So he was gone for almost a week, and he came back, and I just saw it. Like he had this vibrancy to his smile I'd never seen before. He had a light in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Even his skin color was different. I'm like, bro, what the happened to you? He's like, I got no words. It was life-changing, and I just have to introduce you to these people. So I met with them because before we started the Trident Approach, I was really sitting heavily on wanting to become.
And just quickly, can you talk to people about like the sports teams and companies? Like, tell people what Trident Approach does.
Oh yeah. So we're most of us are former, or all of us really are former special operations veterans who know what it is to work on an elite team, but also have the drive to coach people who are trying to find that place for themselves. And there are also people who have transcended their deepest traumas, so they can see how those traumas kind of impact how they lead themselves, how they lead other people, and how they really interact just as a component of being a human. And then so we combine all that stuff together and then bring this approach to conscious leadership and flow state in teams. That's what the Trident Approach is. So, and we do keynotes, we do individual coaching, we do team coaching, and then we take people out on the beach and we go through basically like these what appear to be like SEAL training things, but on a much deeper level. They're allowing people to see how they respond and how they lead, communicate, work together as a team, how they align with their culture under stress, and gives them an opportunity to say, I don't like doing that anymore. I want to do something different. And then we show them the way that they want, how they want to perform in stress in a safe but fun kind of way on the beach while music is playing and that kind of thing. So when they show up to work on Monday, they're closer to what they had in mind of who they actually are instead of there being a disconnect. So that's what the Trident Approach is. So super fun, super powerful way to help people gain self-awareness and then also start to exercise some of the muscles that they want and towards becoming a better leader, or whatever that means for them. It's not our agenda, by the way.
It's funny as you talk about that. It makes me think about you trying out for SEALs and then it eating at you for those years in between when you weren't one, but you felt like you had it in you. I was thinking about like after the last episode when we were having tacos down there in California and talking, I think for me, like, you know, in my 20s, I built, you know, like one of the businesses I built was into the tens of millions, and then it totally crashed and burned with the 2008 crisis, right? And I basically spent my 30s like underconfident and like not being myself. And it's been like this process to get back to being like, no, I don't think I'm going to be happy with myself if I don't try for the big leagues, like full tilt again. And it's been interesting, like getting back to that place, because it's like, I mean, I have more skills than I did in my 20s. Why haven't I accomplished this? You know, that's what I spent a lot of my 30s kind of beating myself up about. And I feel like I'm finally getting back to that place where I'm like, I'm ready to go back to buds. Like, I'm ready to go back to like what I feel like I didn't fulfill. And it's kind of an interesting comparison for me, even though it's a completely different world. And you know, there's no comparison in like the actual activities or the physicals in any way, but mentally it feels like there's an analog.
Mentally it's exactly the same. My guess is if shame drove you out and you're using shame to drive yourself back in, you know, you can still build another $100 million company. And if that fails, it's not about that. It's about...
I would actually say it differently. I would say differently. I would say that the 2008 financial crisis drove me out, and that shame kept me from trying again my entire 30s.
Right.
And that finally getting over that is letting me attempt it again.
Is there getting over shame if shame isn't recognized for what it actually is? So shame is driving you back into there. I'm trying not to give... Do you see what I'm saying? So here's why I'm saying what I'm saying. Let's say the financial crisis of 2024 happens, or 2020, you get your company in 2025, everything happens. Like, where are you then? If you're not in a place where you're powerfully at peace, regardless of what happens with the economy, regardless of what happens with the economy, but you're in this place of peaceful power, how different are you, really? There is another way, you know, and that's, I think, kind of getting back to our whole thing about, well, you know, what it is about these medicines that are helping people. At the end of the day, why I got into this, why when I was introduced to those people and I chose to stay, was I ultimately ended up doing the medicine myself, and I started to see things all around me that I never saw before, that were there the whole time. Things about the mind, things like shame, is using that as a driving force, or fear, using that as like, well, you know, I don't want to end up being like this, so I'm going to work myself so that I don't. Without ever realizing that I was basically using fear as my gasoline. So just having fear just cycling throughout my body as my motive, as my mechanism for movement. And seeing psychedelics, you know, or the effects of psychedelics show me, like really show me that I don't need fear as my gasoline anymore. Like I could use love as my gasoline, where there's good stuff pumping through me, and that is the inspiration for my movement at all, instead of shame. And in order to do all that, this is why this matters. In order to do that, so much work has to go into strengthening and developing these muscles that I'd never used before, like ever in my life. What I found is that the world can come crashing down all around me, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't, because I am where I am in this way. And so if Eckhart Tolle has this really cool comment. It's like, if your bicycle isn't good enough, the Bentley will never be good enough. And so if the self isn't in a place of powerful peace, regardless of what it is or it isn't doing, the business isn't going to help. The new house isn't going to help. All of this stuff isn't going to help. All these external things aren't going to help. Like, it has to be from within.
Yeah. So I'm interested in this. Tell me more about this idea of love being the gasoline. I like where you're going there.
This is before psychedelics. One day I was driving over the Coronado Bridge, and I don't know where it came from. It just hit me. What if it was possible to move because of love? Like, it didn't have to be shame or fear or whatever. But the funny thing is, I didn't even really know what I was saying, because I didn't really fully understand what love was at all. I had in my mind what it was, but I didn't have like a deep connection to like what loving myself even meant, what loving other people actually meant. I didn't know. So it just stayed with me for a long time. But then the more I started to connect with this deeper part of myself, and this, as far as I can tell, love is actually kind of like the bloodstream of the universe, really. It's just all there is. It's just like pumping blood everywhere. It's just whether or not I'm tapping into it or not. Because I had so much experience. I had, like, up to that point, I had like 30 years experience of leveraging fear as my mode of achieving anything, or succeeding in anything, or persevering, or whatever. I mean, the reason why I'm a SEAL at all is because I was ashamed for not making it the first time. First time I went through it, I went through because, like, it seemed like a really kick-ass job to do. The second time I was there, I was purely only there because I was sick and tired of having those dreams about not making it through. And then so when I started these little experiments of like, you better get out of bed, you lazy scumbag kind of thing. Like, get out there and go run, because that's what Navy SEALs do. I would get up out of bed and I would go run, and it would just be like hatred, just pumping through me. It's like hate of the self, non-acceptance of the self. I should be better. I could be doing better, whatever, this and that, whatever. And I would run using that feeling. All of a sudden I would get done with a 6-mile run and be like, yeah, good job, But then I started to understand that I could recognize that for what it was. And so, well, what that is, this is a big jump that I'm making now, and we can come back to it if you want, but all that was is ego, just hammering me down. And I see now the ego is my great teacher. And so I think the ego in that instance was trying to teach me how to love myself. And so now when I wake up and it's like, get up out of bed, you lazy dirtbag. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I know what this is. That's ego. That's not who I really am. It's just a component within me that I don't have to listen to. I get to get out of bed and run because it makes me stronger, and run because it makes me feel good, run because it has a huge impact on how my day is going and all this kind of stuff. Like, I get to run because I've been in many times in my life where I couldn't have run even if I wanted to. I was just so busted up. But I can run right now if I want to. I can, like, live life in a good way if I want to. Yeah, it's going to be hard, but 3 minutes into the run, everything is going to be different. Let's do that. So I'm literally accomplishing the same thing. I'm still running 6 miles, but one is fueled by, you look at this life you get to experience, look at all this power you have, look at all these capabilities and everything. And, you've been through so much, and look what you're doing right now. I could spend, 35, 40 minutes, whatever it is, however long the run takes me of doing that, as opposed to like, you're not fast enough. Nope, it's not good enough. If you were in combat right now, you had somebody on your shoulder. How fast would you be moving? There's a massive difference and now you start to talk about people who exercise every day. And if they exercise for 30 to 40 or 60 minutes every day, and just that loop of fuel that's going through their body, of where they're only left with their mind and their thoughts, you can imagine where people are going to be in several years' time, of the dialogue that they have with themselves. There's that really cool study of that Japanese scientist who put water, and then he just told the water, I love you, I love you, I love you, for like however many hours, and then he put it under a microscope, and there were like these beautiful, like snowflake crystallized shapes. And then he took that same water and just said, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you for like 8 hours, and it was all disaggregated and crooked and bent up and all this stuff. Our bodies are, whatever people say, 60 to 80% worth of water. Same thing is true for us. I'm only saying this because my whole life up until psychedelics, I had only been talking to myself like, you better do this or else, or you're not good enough or whatever. And I could just really start to see what kind of like cellular commotion that was creating within me. That look, man.
You know what I love about this is some of my favorite like philosophers of all time and mentors. Like there's this guy named Terry Warner, who's probably my biggest hero besides my own grandpa, my mom's dad, Grandpa Bridge. He taught at Oxford University and here at University in the States for years. He's got this book called Bonds That Make Us Free that's like in my, I don't know, top, out of like maybe 1,000 business books, it's probably in my number one or top 3 for like things that actually changed my life. And so much of it is based on this Austrian philosopher from 100 years ago named Martin Buber, who says that at any given point, there's one of 2 versions of ourselves interacting with other people. And like that kind of like almost anything we can do can be done in one of 2 ways. And his language is like an I to a you, like human to human. Like I'm thinking about you like a real life human, like you got problems like I've got, you've got things you want, like you've got, this considerate type of personality. Or I to an it, right? Like me to an object. Like I've objectified people some way. I've either put them up on a pedestal, like, oh, you couldn't understand somebody like me. Like, of course the girls like you. You were born with muscles on top of your shoulders. Or, your daddy got you your job at Goldman Sachs after he got you into Harvard. You have no idea what life is like for, somebody hard done by like me. Or the teeter-totters the other way of like, well, lucky for you, needy people. I'm here to fix things for you. Like I'm, walking around thinking I'm a big deal. Right? But whatever flavor of objectification that like most of our people, his premise is that most of our people problems come from this, of objectifying others and then rationalizing it to ourselves. But that we don't actually have to, it doesn't actually have to be with anyone right there, that objectification can be happening at any point. Like this idea of like, you think about, I know this is true for me and for many of our consulting company clients of like I've said things to myself way, way more rude than I would say to anyone I care about. You know what I mean? And not felt guilty for like the super negative self-talk and just like the toilet bowl of death, right? Of things that if anyone was saying those things to someone I cared about, I would be like jumping and stopping, but I'm fine. Like no problem saying it to myself. Yeah. Right. And like issues of worthiness and like, it's like invited me, like the imposter syndrome is showing up where like, I wanted to like create the cardboard cutout version of myself that I hoped all the rest of you believed in of Jess is acceptable. Don't kick him out of the group,
Yeah. How I experienced that whole thing is I just thought that was me saying that to me, and that was just, I don't even really think that I thought much more beyond that. For example, like that was like the relationship I was creating with myself or whatever. I just kind of, it just was. And this is just sort of my lot in life. And then when I found out where that voice was coming from, that was one thing. And then when I found out what that voice actually was a whole other thing. And then in the years after, through integration and strengthening and developing and awareness, that I understood that, number one, I didn't have to listen to that voice at all. And then number two, I could help shape that voice internally over time. Like that was really the game changer.
Okay, so this is what I love about your love is the gasoline statement. Like I'm totally going to plagiarize you from here on out. Hope you're okay with that. Okay?
I love you, dude.
Like it makes me think of this. It makes me think of this this like Buddhist saying or Buddhist belief that work doesn't have to be something we dislike. Yeah. That work can be viewed as service for others. which doesn't sound that like revolutionary as I say it on my outside voice. But like, I think about how often work has been about me and my goals and what I'm trying to get for myself, instead of like love is the gasoline, and me thinking about like showing up and what I'm doing. Like, am I primarily doing it so that I can get the money, and what service do I have to do to get the money? Or am I primarily doing it as like, what service and help can I offer, and money's a natural byproduct of that? And I think a lot of my life, that's been flipped the wrong way.
See, this is the hard part about mindfulness, because I would even throw another wrench into that thing. It's like, what self-serving are you talking? What self of the self-serving are you talking about? Because if you're talking about serving the ego, money and accomplishment and all that kind of stuff, I totally get you. I'm totally with you. But if you're starting to talk about serving the self, like the deep self, the self beyond the thinking mind, the self that is like an extension of God, you cannot go wrong. In fact, there can be no more powerful than that. And by the way, as a byproduct.
But I would argue with you, or I don't know if it'd be an argument, and I want to weigh in on that that deep self that you're talking about, because I completely agree with you, that one of the best things I can do for that deep self of me is actually care about the people in front of me. That's like one of the best things I can do for like the deep.
So here's what ego, well, again, this is a big, long thing, and this is what's so hard. I was telling you before, it was like, this is like years of going through this whole thing. You were talking before about like there's two ways you can show up, like showing up, like putting people up on this pedestal or acting like they're another human being, right? Another way to say that, and I don't think that's, not that it's any of my business, not that I know any different whatsoever, but I would say that the same thing in other words. And the other words that I would choose are, there's duality and non-duality. And duality means that there's two, right? So that you and I are separate from each other somehow. You are Jess, and you are an island, and I'm Diego, and I am an island, and therefore, whatever, we're like these two opposing forces and this, that, whatever. I don't know if this is true. It's just in my experience, and deep experience, that nothing is separate. That you and I are not separate at all. We're like fingers coming from the same hand. Like, this is who we are, and this is how Jess is manifesting in the world, and this is how Diego, but at the end, we're like this. So anything I do for or against you, I am doing to myself. So this is ego.
No, I can follow you here. I like where you're going.
So this is ego, and this is the deep self beyond the thinking mind. So if you're saying that in order, or if someone is saying that in order for me to truly serve, I need to do something for this, right? Because that's really, at the end of the day, that's the thing that matters the most. That is ego, because these are egos.
Okay, let me say it a better way and see if it works for you this way. Is that when I'm doing things, treating myself like an island, that's unlikely to turn into long-term happiness. But when I'm doing things out of deep connection, that's going to increase the chance for happiness. Deep
connection to what?
To the other, to these people that are like an extension of us, like you were saying.
This is what's so hard, because it is the self. There's a difference between being selfish and being self-full, right? So the more you build and nurture and solidify the root system and the foundation of who you are, it's like, you've heard the statement, like, change yourself and you change the world. Like, that's where it comes from. So if you spent, here's another way to say it, if you spend all your time helping and serving in the service of others, eventually, somehow, in some capacity, in some way, you would break, because you need to take care of the farm first, kind of thing.
Yeah. No. I'm fully with you on that, because, and I guess for me, it's more like, instead of having the teeter-totter tipped this way or tipped that way, it's like having the teeter-totter not tipped. Because if the teeter-totter isn't tipped, then I can be honest about the responsibility for me to put my oxygen mask on first before working to get my kids on, no matter how much I love my kid. Like, when I'm not putting myself above or below others, so that would mean not neglecting myself in the name of service for others, right? Are we getting closer? I know that they say philosophy is
It's just
semantics,
you're exactly right. It's not
but,
like I know anything. I just see it as I think just like there's just this tiny little difference that to me makes a lot of difference. But whatever. So what? I could have an experience tomorrow that would completely undo everything I'm telling you right now, and it's just as long as I just have to remain curious, and that's all I have to do. That way it'll keep me from thinking that I know anything, because I don't.
Yeah. You know what I think is fun with our conversations is how concerned you are with the human experience. I think it's just magnetic how most of the world is so transactional.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I enjoy spending time with you is you're so concerned with the human experience for yourself and for others.
Yeah. I love how I feel when I'm around you. I love how I feel when, I'm just, you don't need anything. You just be like, yeah, that feeling right there. That's the man. Not like what you could give me.
Okay. You know I love these talks. Let's do it again. Okay, for anybody who wants to get the book, is Amazon the best place? Try and approach website. Where should they be
Amazon,
going?
it's there. Leading from the Deep. We're there. I'm excited. It's my first book.
So, hard copy, paperback. Is there like a Kindle or an audiobook?
Kindle, and then an audiobook. We might be recording in February, we think. So, yeah, that's coming out as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Super excited.
Okay. This is great.
I appreciate you, man.
Fun to have you back.
This is the first time we've talked where you haven't cried, man. I must be losing my.
Right? Seriously, are you? You might be losing your touch. You might be losing your touch. Oh,
I love you, man.
Too funny. I love it.
Appreciate you.
Okay. Well, I love you, and I
too.
love what you're doing to help other people have a life where they get to feel whole and get that to be contagious for each other.
How else would that be?
Great work, and thanks for doing this again.
Yes, I appreciate you.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye, everyone.